the word to him.
Thank you, Sina. Hello, everybody. My name is Salvatore, and I come from Italy, but I am employed at Copenhagen University, so I'm an academic researcher, but I'm also what you may call an activist or a political agent, agitator, that has, in the last 10 years, both worked with social movements, to advance different issues like from environmental issues, but also social and political issues. And I've also been writing about these things. I've been thinking hard. And today with you, I want to share my reflections based on all these years of work on specifically strategies and tactics on how can we advance together towards the world that we would like to see. So I have prepared something to read because my short memory does work so well. So bear with me. I will try to make it more lively. But my idea is to present you my thoughts and then have hopefully a conversation, a debate with your comments, critiques that may come. So the situation is dire. We all know that the world is on a catastrophic course. Global emissions are rising. The solutions promoted by government and corporations are not really mitigating anything, nor preparing societies for the upheavals already here and those to come, and not redressing social inequalities. So the ecological transition from above actually shows all its limits. It fails in pursuing climate mitigation. It fails in halting ecological destruction. And it is compromised with the priorities of capital and of imperial geopolitics. It thus cannot achieve social and ecological justice. Business as usual, to simply go on as we are, means a death sentence for millions. All this is the result of huge power imbalances. Corporations nowadays have more rights than people. Their wishes are more important for governments than the needs of citizens. Then we have militarized imperial projects of rogue states attempting to decide who ought to exist and who can be killed the world over. Democracies have been emptied from the inside, leaving free rein to the hoarding of profits by monopoly capitalists. A bleak picture, I know, but bear with me. This is also a sober analysis of the historical conjuncture that we confront as activists and as movements. But not everything is lost. Actually, the struggle begins now, as it has always to begin again and again, no matter the forces standing against us. Political action doesn't always need to ask what is likely or what is possible. It needs to ask what is necessary. So, given the failures of the ecological transition from above, I want to focus this intervention on some reflections and examples to think together how we can build the needed counterpower to bring forward the social and ecological transformation from below. So my framework of reference is climate justice, that is, as you know, a political project with large implication that, in my view, has the potential to embrace all the social and ecological struggles that are trying to make the world a better place for all. The core of my contribution here today is precisely to put at the center the question of how. How do we realize the world we would like to see? How do we bring forward radical transformations from below in the name of climate justice? What are the concrete strategies and tactics we may use to create the organizing structures and to build enough counterpower? And there is a short answer to all these questions that could be said in one word, that is together. So my wish in this talk is to offer a base for collective thinking and discussions on the possibilities and the difficulties of creating strong coalitions of movements, alliances and collaborations across struggles, or what I call a convergence of movements that was actually mentioned in the previous talk. So the word convergence has two main meanings. On the one hand, it means to come from different directions and meet at a specific place. On the other hand, it also characterizes a number of things gradually changing so as to become similar or develop something in common. Both of these meanings, coming together from different directions and gradually changing to develop common visions, are crucial for the work of building counterpower. So, Hannah Arendt, the political philosopher, argued that big crises are a fruitful moment for questioning orthodoxies and established ideas. This is because crises bring about the ruin of our categories of thought and standards of judgment, such that traditional truths seem no longer to apply. So in these moments, dominant old ideas are in a state of uncertainty, and fresh ones are potentially ready to take their place. So we are in one of those moments. And the best thing we can say about the many crises around us is that they are revealing to all those who did not realize it yet that the dominant economic system of neoliberal capitalism, allied to imperial geopolitics, is not only unable to deliver on people's needs, but it's also driven by a logic of endless growth and profit-making, which is incompatible with maintaining conditions suitable for life on planet Earth. So this system and its defenders have lost all legitimacy. This is not the best possible world, as it was promised, and the ongoing genocide of Palestinian people, supported by Western powers, the same powers that maintain and defend the infrastructures and flows of capitalism, reinforce the awareness that the dominant countries in the world have zero legitimacy left to any claim of morality, freedom, or democracy. These are psychopaths. The world they structured is the worst possible world. Now we know it for sure. And this is liberating, in a sense, because it opens up the imagination to experiments of living differently, to attempts at creating new cultures and new institutions, at regaining control over our own lives and our environments, at rebuilding the world on a radically different basis. So this awareness is increasingly becoming common sense. This system is doomed. It has always been, but now everybody can see it. And now we can leave it behind. The pursuit of alternatives has never been so legitimate and widespread. Indeed, it seems today there is an abundance of imaginaries of alternative to the current catastrophic trajectory. We have degrowth, eco-socialism, decoloniality, buen vivir, steady state, donut economics, etc., etc. And radical ideas are great. And in the middle of a crisis, that is also a crisis of legitimacy of the dominant system and its ideas, these radical designs of alternatives, of more just words, can provide the necessary vision. But the ideas and the crisis go to waste if there is a lack of a crucial component: social movements. Social movements play a fundamental role in processes of historical change. They do this through amplifying crises that are simmering under the surface or that are ignored by the dominant actors in society. And they do this by prefiguring radically different ways of living. So we have today many movements putting on the agenda the climate, ecological, social crisis, and political crisis of our time. However, these movements still do not manage to turn the balance of forces. What we need to do, I argue, is to organize better both within and across the movements we are part of, and to develop a more clear-eyed perspective on how we can confront the powerful interests and structures standing in the way of systemic change. So this is why the question of strategy is so important for anyone engaged in efforts for socio-ecological transformation. And in particular, here, I am concerned with the strategies and tactics for the convergence of movements around a broadly defined climate justice agenda. But what is climate justice? So climate justice has the roots in popular movements for social and environmental justice. Resistance to pollution and against fossil fuel extraction constitute the backdrop of the principles and demands that came to shape climate justice. So these principles and demands have been also translated into policy recommendations and also contentions points by especially Global South nations in international summits like the COPs. So what a climate justice perspective does is first to make visible historical and contemporary forms of injustice that are inherent to the dominant political economic system and imperial division of the world. And second, climate justice can provide a roadmap to redress these injustices and to build a fairer and more equal world. Climate justice brings the past to bear on the present and concerns itself with the future. It is an approach that puts front and center issues of fairness that resonate with centuries-old demands for equality, justice, decolonization, and freedom. Climate justice is not only compatible with degrowth, it actually informs it, complements it. This is because degrowth advocates for a needs-based economic system, not a profit-based one, that remains within the ecological and climatological limits of planet Earth and that fosters the maximum of democratization into decisions affecting life and ecology, while also creating mechanisms to prevent concentration of power and wealth. So bringing together the question of transformation with climate justice framework provides, I think, a more clear vision of the basic strategies that we need to confront this system. So first, we need a strategy for stopping harm. So fighting the power of destruction with the power of popular resistance. This includes to stop, to blockade, to strike, even to sabotage. In short, all those practices that confront power directly, even physically. Second, we need a strategy for developing alternative structures. This means using the cracks and blind spots, all those areas that are not under complete control of the dominant system, to develop new modes of life and new institutions of a liberated world already now. So this points to using creatively any space or possibility that is out of the reach of power to nurture self-organization and autonomy, so as to increase the structures that sustain the struggle and prefigure the future. But third, we also need a strategy of building counter-hegemony, and this is another Gramscian term. I'm very happy that Gramsci was mentioned before. So counter-hegemony, hegemony is a way of power to control, not just through physical repression, but also through creating a certain idea of the world and spreading this idea through media, education. It's a way to legitimize and naturalize the world we have around as the only possible one, so that a full hegemony allows power to control without repressing. So we need to build a counter-hegemony within this system. This means making climate justice ideas and practices a sort of common sense. So this is about infiltrating the existing institutions and locations of power to build counterpower from within the system, meaning bringing radical ideas and practices in places where there are not, or by using the tools that reduce freedom, like the media, party politics, the academia, to repurpose them so that they instead increase freedom. So these strategies of transformations must be connected in a way that they mutually reinforce each other. Therefore, my emphasis on the need to work towards a convergence of movement. So based on personal engagement and scholarly analysis, I identified the 6 approaches to the problem of building collaborations, alliances, and solidarities between movements. So these approaches materialize in moments and places and practices that intersect different injustices, different social groups, and in which the political work that we should do as activists and movements is to deliberately and intentionally building links and mutual influences, and to elaborate shared horizon of struggles. So these 6 approaches that now I'm about to go into are connection, escalation, prefiguration, just transition, preparation, and litigation. And I offer some thoughts on each of them. So prepare for the ride. First, connection. So this is, I think, the basis of climate justice. So making climate injustice explicit and visible is all about connecting different histories and geographies. Creating strong coalitions, it's all about connecting issues and movements. So connections reach out and build structures and networks. Take, for example, the Zapatistas, that probably many of you know. So from a remote, isolated region of Mexico, they launched a global revolution. So it was just a bunch of young revolutionaries with Marxist ideas that came from the city, met with indigenous communities, and in the process of this encounter, both recognized each other and worked out their differences to craft something specific to their context. It was an experimental fusing of categories that do not really fall into indigenous, non-indigenous, local or global, modern, traditional. So in the case of the Zapatistas, the international attention was fundamental to prevent harsh repression from the Mexican state. So from their very first message to the world, they invited the international community of people, not states, to watch over their battles. So they organized summits, encounters in the jungle. They extended their struggle beyond their geographical remoteness. They connected contemporary forms of dispossession with longer histories of colonial destruction. And they developed a place-based politics that was also a global project. So they still exist, and many support them. So I do think we have a lot to learn from this kind of outwardly connection, from this building of international solidarities. So expanding the front lines of struggle in space, this is also a manifestation of connection by, for example, linking the focus point of an action to globally interconnected sites of destruction. So this strategy of connection in practices and narratives sustains the internationalist solidarity that is at the core of climate justice politics. So this is what, for example, Folk mot Fossilgas did in Sweden during their 3-year struggle against a gas terminal in Gothenburg. After 3 years of campaign, they decided we're going to block the infrastructure. But they connected that infrastructures to both the indigenous territories in North America where gas was extracted and brought people from there to speak about their experiences and to intermediate docking stations of fossil gas ships in Ireland, and they brought people from there too. So it became not just a climate issue, not just a local Swedish issue, it became a global issue in which there were human rights, climate justice concern, indigenous people rights. So these kind of examples, I think, are really inspiring. But we are also seeing, for example, Fridays for Future, that recently has shifted rhetoric and has put political emphasis on the most affected people and areas, those hit by climate disasters, emphasizing climate debt and reparations in school strikes and demonstrations. But connections can also be performed. What else are we doing during a die-in at the mall, for example, if not showing the connection between consumerism and death? And also, what else are we doing when we blockade an arm factory in Denmark to bring attention to the cooperation of Western states and corporations with the genocide ongoing in Gaza, if not performing, denouncing, and combating connections? Therefore, the work of connection cuts through all climate justice struggles and remains a fundamental tool for building coalitions and networks to elaborate shared visions of problems and of solutions. The second approach, escalation. So the possibility to escalate tactics, it's a hot topic, we all know, in activist circles, that brings a lot of questions. What exactly is violence under climate breakdown? Which role militant disruption, sabotage has in the fight for climate justice, considering that militant disruption and sabotage has been part of all previous emancipatory struggles of the past. So it seems to many that a variety of tactics, including sabotage, that focus on property but safeguard lives, could become part of the repertoire of climate and environmental movement. Okay. So the most famous expression of this argument has been provided by Andreas Malm in How to Blow Up a Pipeline. So according to Malm, a small group devoted to sabotage, that is not a vanguardist separated from the movement, but that is organically connected to the movement, could provide finally the risk of investment and force the government to deal with the more moderate flank. And there is actually some some research evidence that this sometimes it works. However, we should not forget that there are huge costs for those engaged in sabotage. And we do need dedicated structures of support and also to work on social acceptance of sabotage. And this was very clear, for example, to Earth First and Earth Liberation Front, active in the 80s and 90s, that had to contend with harsh repression. And they developed a security culture and structures based on strong bonds of mutual care to support the prisoners. And this, I would argue, building such structures during the prosecution of activists and by creating narratives that justify sabotage provide fertile ground for convergence. However, and I'm moving to the next prefiguration, there are risks in just focusing on escalation, because a strategy that only targets fossil fuels, capital accumulation, or even urban centers through sabotage or civil disobedience without doing the work, the political work, to bring together also other social interests around the climate justice agenda, it's actually doomed to provoke a backlash from potential allies and prevent convergence. So other non-combative, non-confrontational forms of direct action that are reminiscent of organized labor societies and also of customary practices in indigenous communities that are rooted in mutual help networks, autonomous forms of service provision, social reproduction, and caring structures are also required. Because the main issue is also how do we liberate the reproduction of life, how are living every day, day to day, from fossil capitalism and from capitalism in general. Because capitalism still shapes the expectations and the livelihoods of many. So therefore, combative direct action climate politics should go together with the nurturing popular autonomy that transforms social desire. So occupations and blockades can be made acceptable and even desirable for the majority only if we turn the post-carbon world into an attractive reality, something that is announced by concrete practices of involvement and sustenance. So strategies of regeneration and flourishing of communities and ecosystems, such as social cooperatives, shared urban gardens, neighborhood parties, collective purchase groups, swapping and repair shops, and all other forms of mutual help and solidarity economies provide the necessary bedrock to strategies of disruption, insofar as they nurture new desires and break toxic attachments. And the potential convergence around self-organized forms of social reproduction could then be built through associations, cooperatives, coalitions, and new political parties. Next, just transition. So any work on convergence around climate justice should also take as a point of departure a scale where people can imagine themselves having an agency. So the project of expanding agency, for example, from your household to the neighborhood, to the city, to the region, to the world, should be meaningful, still meaningful for the individual agent. And one of the most important scale for the individual is the workplace. So climate activist relation with workers and unions so far have not been the best. But we should be aware that for workers, this is a very crucial moment, because next to the risk of entire sectors and workplaces disappearing, there are also many impacts on production created by the ecological transition from above. And so workers are forced to take position in relation to the climate crisis. And some workers' movements are actually seizing the moment and also exploring possibilities for convergence with climate movements. Of course, they don't want to be sacrificed on the altar of the ecological transition, but they are also bringing back something coming from a little older tradition, the desire to control the production process. And I would say this is something that should become a central concern for a climate justice politics that is not trapped in a reductionist reading of the crisis. And we have examples. So one potential path towards this goal is being given by the experiment of the GKN factory, a former car parts factory in Florence. Basically, the workers received mass layoff letters from the plant's owner, and then they decided to occupy the factory and started the political process in and out of the factory walls. So they found support in independent research groups, local community struggles, jurists, intellectuals, and climate movements. And together, they drafted the plan of industrial reconversion to address social and environmental problems and to guarantee employment. So no more building car parts, but building cargo bikes and solar panels. And this is currently the only concrete plan available for the factory. So these connections exist, but needs to be politicized, and we need to build on. And our work as activists is to make explicit this area of potential collaboration with workers. So the last two, and then I'm done, is that the next is preparation. So one role for climate justice activism in an increasingly uncertain climate and world should include self-organized disaster preparation and response for the most vulnerable and disenfranchised in areas hit by extreme weather events. So this connects the solidarity work and the mutual aid for post-disaster recovery with demands for climate justice and just transition. So we know about grassroots solidarity brigades that, for example, have existed in post-earthquake, post-hurricane setting. Now, how do we scale that? How do we organize better around that? So, for example, some examples of the recent past is the Occupy movement that maybe some of you remember that existed in New York City against the ultra-rich. But they existed while Hurricane Sandy, one of the biggest hurricanes in history, hit New York City. And what they did, they turned their social movements into a coordinated disaster response group that at the height of their activism coordinated more than 60,000 volunteers. So such a proactive grassroots climate agenda addresses the very fabric of society. It doesn't mean that we should stop asking for mitigation, but it means to bring together mitigation concern with so far overlooked, even by climate activists, issues of adaptation, preparedness, prevention of losses and damage, disaster response, and just recovery. Also because vulnerability to climate extremes is related to determinants that are social. So social injustice is actually the root of vulnerability to disasters created by climate change. So if climate justice movements want to deal with adaptation, they need to engage more seriously with social justice movements. So at the global level, campaigns to cancel the debt and address unjust trade imbalances also would help liberate resources to respond to disaster. But even in urban context, the knowledge of social vulnerabilities by local activists could be used by climate movements to drive upward also political demands linked to a social justice agenda. And I would say preparation is also about self-defense. So getting ready for an unstable future where the rise of fascist regimes is actually a real possibility. And some would say it's already here. And lastly, my last approach is litigation. So climate litigation, meaning legal action against states and corporations to call them to their responsibilities of pursuing a climate mitigation agenda or to call them to their responsibilities of respecting human rights, it's already happening. It's a strategy that complements social mobilizations from the streets to the courts. And it's also a tool that it's spreading all around the world, and we are seeing some results. For example, in May 2021, in the Netherlands, the energy company Royal Dutch Shell was convicted and made legally responsible for greenhouse gas emissions from its entire value chain and obliged to put down those emissions. And this is the first time any court in the world has imposed a duty on a company to do its share to prevent dangerous climate change. So in a sense, this court is saying this fossil fuel company is responsible, they must act. Now, this idea that fossil fuel companies are responsible and that maybe they are the real criminals it's also important for the other side of repression, or for the other side of litigation that we do as activists, that is the one against repression. So in one sense, if we bring together litigation against corporations and defense of activists in court, and we manage to show that the corporations are real criminals and also certified by the courts, we may have new arguments to defend activists that the states want to convict for civil disobedience. So the point is to show who are the real criminals. And as achieving this societal awareness can help turning those who contest or sabotage fossil infrastructure from felons to protectors. So in this sense, also the link between inside and outside of the courts, it's actually an arena to practice convergence. To conclude, deliberate political work towards a convergence of movements, sectors, and civil society is unavoidable at this point in time. Climate justice can provide the framework, but we also need hard day-to-day political work. So in my contribution, I discussed connection, escalation, prefiguration, just transition, preparation, and litigation. So these are approaches that may offer us some inspiration to work towards this goal. This way are already being tested in a variety of contexts, but drawing them together, I aimed also to offer insights and tools to advance their combination. So movements for climate and social justice need to grow together to build the needed counterpower. We don't need vanguardism, we don't need isolation, we need collaboration and mutual strengthening more than ever. Because it depends on us to stop the dystopian future in the making. And it's only by acting collectively and collaboratively that we will turn the dystopia into a hopeful, really existing utopia. Thank you. I took all the time, I know.
A single question or two?
Yes, please. So please, I took too much time, of course, as academics like to speak, but please come up with questions, comments, critique, anger.
We also started a little late. Yes.
Okay, thanks.
We have time for a single question or two. Anybody or comment? Oh.
Yeah, thank you for your research and your presentation. I'm curious on, do you see any obstacles in collaboration and making these connections? Yeah. I'm thinking in particular about obstacles like ideology. You made a good case of the Zapatistas, where there was they found a mutual understanding and framework. Right now, I see in the movement, the broad climate movement, that different ideologies actually make cooperation very difficult, because some people are standing very hard on their ideology, which prevents them from working together with others. If you have any thoughts on this thing and what we can do about it, if there's anything to do about it.
Yes. That's a great point, and it's a critical one. And you know, like a journalist some days ago asked me, "Oh, a lot of Danish people are wondering why was Greta Thunberg joining the Palestinian Solidarity Movement? You know, isn't she only about climate?" So you are absolutely right that we are also victims of ideological cages in which topics are isolated from each other, separated from each other. And so if you care about the climate, you don't mention Palestine. Or if you care about Palestine, you don't mention about other liberation struggles. And I do think that there is a need to do the work of hegemony also within our movements. So what I mean is that some things we cannot compromise. That, for example, the climate justice struggle includes the struggle for ending the genocide and for the rights of self-determination for all people. So this is something we can't compromise. Now, the point is, do we hammer this on the head of people? No. But if, something that research has shown, that rather than talking to people and try to convince them with words, what convinces people is actually direct experience. So one idea that also brings together, advocacy and prefiguration politics is to create spaces in which the main point is not politics, it's coming together, dine together, exchange ideas, but then through the being together, also drive political content. So it's to create spaces where many people are welcome, but that are also spaces for political training through direct experience. So through more social relations and doing things together rather than explaining why you're wrong. So I mean, I know this is not much, but this is actually a problem that we are all, fighting with. And I would say, in some cases we cannot compromise. So climate is also a human rights issue. On this we can't compromise.
We have time for one more question. Yes, thank you for a very inspiring and visionary presentation. I was wondering about sort of the counter to the counter power, because just like you and Hannah Arendt, I would love to hope that the crisis could be an opportunity for counter power and operating in this sort of space of uncertainty and ambiguity that the crisis makes. But we also know from history that sometimes crisis also means the enhancement of conservative approaches and conservative power and really an enhancement of the established hegemony and power. So one thing is I thought that was very inspiring. You talk about these more ambiguous actors like maybe some labor movements and so on. One thing is to appeal to them, and I can certainly see that's a great idea to work from there. But how about these more hostile, hard sort of responses, sort of the counter power to the counter power?
Yeah.
Is there a strategy for approaching them?
So a case in point of what you just mentioned is in the 1930s, after the global economic crisis. The global economic crisis worked it was seized as a political moment in Scandinavian countries to start the process that then would lead to the welfare state, because workers' movements were really strong. But the same crisis in Italy and Germany gave rise to fascism and Nazism. So you are absolutely right. It depends whole on the historical conjuncture and moment and on those forces that mobilize. So what I tried to emphasize in this talk is that there is a need of deliberate political work. So in crisis, we cannot expect them to naturally bring about a more, fair or equal world. There is a need to actual day-to-day work to bring together different groups, to be able to create spaces of convergence, to take up issues and actions. And how to counter the counters? We need to be more. We need to be many. And sometimes we need to be better organized. And maybe this is not the most nice thing to say, but we should also be ready to self-defend ourselves. So if, as it's happening in Italy, the fascists organize and they are ready, as they were in the 20s, to go and do the dirty job of capitalists, they will have to find people ready to fight them. And I know I don't want to be the macho saying, oh, we should get the weapons, but it's unavoidable. At a certain point in time, we will have to defend ourselves. That's what I mean with preparation. Because having networks and structures that are already close-knit and connected allows us to prepare even for those, ugly developments that may happen. And in Italy, we are witnessing. So it is happening.
Short question, last one, and then I have some info.
I really like your 6 strategies, and I think it's a great opportunity for lots of different movements to converge and use these 6 strategies together. But I'm interested whether you find that people agree with your 6 strategies. Are there any ones that people don't like as much, or any groups that disagree with you on whether these are the right strategies to use?
It's funny you say, because other times when I give this presentation, it really depends on the audience. Okay, so now today there was not so much murmuring when I said escalation, but in other environments, if you say something like this, that sabotage may well be part of our, a lot of people would just shut down and close. And so that's one fight back. And then, as I mentioned before, there is this idea that, if we do climate politics, okay, why do you talk about other things? If it's, international solidarity. I mean, no, we need to drive down the emissions. And so sometimes those who are very much into the urgency and into, like a little bit blinded, that the only thing to do is to stop. So they may miss that this is a long haul struggle. It's not going to end up one day. We're not going to stop climate change like this. And even in a decarbonized, hopefully, world, there is still going to be a need to fight. So, yeah, a lot of pushback, usually between singular elements. But I really, and I'm working on this, on how to develop in a more coherent set of interconnected things, because I think it's very important that these things are reinforcing each other.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Salvatore.
Sorry for
Thank you.
taking too much time.